year-end YouTube Insights Hangout on Air. My name is Tara Walpert-Levy, and we really appreciate your being with us. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're here to chat with a series of industry experts about the latest insights in online video. Today we're going to look at some of the best ads on YouTube across the full year of 2014 and get an exclusive perspective from these guys on what makes these special and how you can make more of them yourself as we head into the new year. So we're lucky to have an esteemed panel with us. Guys, why don't we do some introductions? We've got some old friends on the Hangout and some folks who are with us for the first time. So Rob, why don't we start with you?
Hi, I'm Rob Norman. I'm the Chief Digital Officer of Group M, which is WPP's media planning and buying business, and we're, I think, a beloved customer of Google and YouTube and an old friend of Tara's. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. You are beloved as a company and most importantly as a person. All right, Josh.
Hey everyone, my name is Joshua Spania. I'm a Googler. That is, I work at Google. I am the media director for Google Marketing. So anytime Google runs an ad for anywhere in the world for Google, I'm responsible for the strategy, the execution, the innovation that goes along with it.
Are you a beloved customer for Josh?
I am. We'll
talk about that after the show. Evan, thanks for joining us. You want to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evan Ellman, and I work at Anheuser-Busch in the global headquarters. I work on the global connections team, so very closely with the U.S. team, and I oversee the global video strategy for the company, both best practices in the past and setting the future agenda.
Great. Thanks for being with us. This is a beloved crew across the board, and last but certainly not least, one of our loyal Hangout participants. Allison, you want to share for the newcomers?
Hi everyone, Allison Stern, co-founder of Tubular Labs. Tubular is a video intelligence platform that helps brands and media companies understand, engage, and grow their audiences on YouTube. And thanks for having me. Always love being on the Insights Hangout.
Great, thanks for being here. We have a special treat for everyone. We just released the 2014 Ads Rewind video, which celebrates the best ads of the year on YouTube based on those that viewers most often chose to watch and to share. So we're going to let you see a preview of that work here. You'll see included in that is a spot from our friends at Anheuser-Busch and also a spot for Nike from our friends at Group M. Let's roll the video.
Shall we make out?
What was your name?
Rick. Is the offer number?
365 days a year?
Yes, moms. No, there are no breaks available.
That's very insane.
That's inhumane.
Is that even legal?
Yeah.
Now grow like a girl. Grow like a girl.
Why can't run like a girl also win the race?
Feeling really beautiful, more confident.
It's just a pattern.
Really been a life-altering experience.
This is gonna be good. He's not gonna know what's coming.
Dear kitten, welcome to the household. Oh boy, yeah, you're good. Oh boy, yeah, you're good. Oh boy.
Told me I couldn't be done. Told me I should just quit. Now I'm here.
You wanna play for real? Yeah.
You risk everything to win. They told me I couldn't be done. Told me I should just quit.
No second chance. But hold on a second.
You risk
you guys enjoyed that. It's amazing to me. I really think these ads somehow seem to get better every year, and they certainly seem to get more impactful every year, at least if you look at how folks are choosing to not only watch and share, but engage with these ads and respond to these ads in terms of their perception of the brand and their willingness and proof of acting on what they've actually seen in the spots. Curious, part of this is about how people are continuing to learn how to take advantage of the medium. Would love to hear from each of you. What do you think was one of the biggest online video learnings that either you had or you think the industry had in 2014? And Evan, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so I think it's a phrase probably people are familiar with at this point, but content, it's king, but it's really also nothing without distribution. And I think that's one thing that we've come to really embrace both this year and especially going into next year is just the importance of having a really sound, smart distribution strategy to ensure that the investments that we're making in video get seen by the audiences that we intend to reach. And I think then another piece of that is the right metrics. So not just looking at view counts in absolute, but understanding this pay to earn ratio and really looking behind what is driving efficient paid. So metrics being really crucial as well.
And so when you think about wedding content and distribution, you have a lot more distribution points today than you've had in the past. How do you adjust your strategy as you think about the different platforms that you're taking advantage of?
Well, I think it comes to the audience insight again and being very hyper-relevant targeting being a huge priority. Understanding who we're trying to reach and then building plans backwards from that as well, and really understanding also how the content should live on these different platforms. Different audiences are on different platforms and they're engaging with those platforms in different ways, which means the content should be different and the media and the paid distribution strategy should be different to reach all of them as well.
And what do you think about that, Josh? Is that similar to some of the things that we're seeing and doing? Are there other insights that you're observing?
Those all make perfect sense and I completely agree with them. I think two things sort of jump out at me this year specifically. And this is going to sound slightly, because I work at Google, like I'm sort of blowing our own trumpet, but this really seems to me to be a year where if you want to reach millennials, if you want to reach the next generation, that YouTube came into its own. Not necessarily just as a platform, but really for the talent that it uncovered. The Bethany Moda, Michelle Fans, and other people who YouTube has sort of created and enabled careers to happen, they really crossed over. And when you have Vogue magazine around the world running features on the stars of YouTube, when you have Bethany Moda being featured as a guest judge on Dancing with the Stars, there's been this sort of transformation where it used to be all about getting your TV show, and having a TV show is still powerful, I don't knock that, but this talent coming out of the younger generation really is emerging from YouTube, and I think a lot of brands have recognized that. And we're all seeing every day people looking for the next generation of talent and who these people are, and actually having Vice News in your corner in some ways is more credible perhaps than having a traditional news partner in your corner, certainly for younger audiences. So that's been a very, very interesting development. I think that's only going to continue. And so talent agencies and talent scouts look at YouTube as their primary source for finding their next talent, as I think we all do for our entertainment. I think just on a sort of technical side, I've been pretty amazed at the growth of real-time video. I think it's grown something like, I just read something that IDC is projecting that real-time bidding for video is up 500% year on year, and is roughly equivalent to programmatic. And I know there's some debate about whether real-time bidding in video is the same as programmatic, but still, the automation of what's going on in the video world is mirroring and matching the automation which is going on in the display world. I think brands are getting smart, are getting ahead of that and leveraging that, and 2015 is going to see that increase even more.
Thanks, Josh. I mean, that's interesting because you actually hit on two completely different ends of the spectrum in terms of how we talk about video, right? So you talked first about creators and hot creators, and what instantly popped into my mind was that Variety report that came out earlier in the year that showed of the top 10 celebrities among teens, 5 of them were YouTube stars, which supports what you were saying. And that's consistent with sort of an evolution of a more traditional way of approaching video and approaching association with content. And then you spoke all the way about the other end of the spectrum, which is how do we buy it? How do you access it? Is it as much about the audience as it is about the content, et cetera? And so I'm curious, Rob, I mean, you guys play so heavily in both of those. You know, there's been a lot of debate. Is this a barbell? Is it a spectrum? Do they go together? Are they different? What are you seeing as you look at the marketplace?
Well, if I'm allowed as a media guy to comment on the talent and content issue for a moment.
As though I could stop you.
Yeah, fair enough. I read that same Variety survey. It was in August. I think the first 3 of the list were YouTube stars. The fourth on the list was Paul Walker, the sadly deceased one of the stars of the Fast and Furious franchise, as you'll be aware. And I was wondering if there wasn't something different going on, whether there was a demand among particularly younger people and the generation that's following millennials for more relatable talent, in that perhaps some of the kind of LeBron James superstar era and the Jennifer Aniston and $1 million an episode superstar era is giving away to a more democratized form of and more relatable form of celebrity and people like us. And there's less looking up, but more looking across and feeling like they were joining in. And clearly the kind of social aspects of YouTube and its ability to allow for that easy transference and sharing, I think, is building that phenomena. And I'd love to kind of be in a time machine for like 20 years and go back and to see kind of what the sharing content of the great moments such as they were of Friends might have been, but I suspect it's not the same or wouldn't have been the same as the way it works now. So I'm intrigued by that. On the buying side of it, clearly everyone is pushing towards automation. There are many competing forces in the automation world, but I'll confess and say that there's still a large part of us that is looking at the numbers and modifying those numbers to an extent, because we never think that research is keeping up with change as much as it is. And we're still seeing millennials and younger audiences consuming a lot of linear and time-shifted regular television alongside of YouTube. And I guess our focus is more on whether there is a greater level of attention to ads and video on YouTube, so it's less diluted by multitasking than it is through other platforms. And I think one of our big focuses here at the end of 14 and into 15 is to work out if there's an attention modifier that separates this discussion from the pure numbers. Because on the pure numbers, as reported by Nielsen and others, television's not reached any kind of tipping point or crisis point, but it's possible that on an attention basis, the indexation might look rather different.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I'd be curious what you're seeing to date. In the Insights report we just published, we looked at it specifically actually on mobile YouTube, right? So on the smartphone, and found that very much along the lines of what you're saying, millennials in particular were 2 times less likely to be distracted watching on that device than they were watching on television, which in part is about the experience as much as the platform, but starts to get at the question that you're asking and what happens when you bring them together and sort of where and how people are watching, right? So I think almost 50, or just over 50% of the viewership of YouTube in the US right now is on mobile. So it's bringing those two together pretty tightly and giving you that engagement benefit. Have you guys seen anything yet on how that applies either on YouTube or other online platforms and how that compares to TV, whether it's on the big screen or on the phone?
Well, I think that the evidence as it flows through the models for different advertisers is far more anecdotal right now than it is in anything that's kind of provable in a binary way. And it would be difficult to get a McKinsey-driven model or an Accenture-driven model to make very, very big swing decisions in favor of YouTube mobile video right now. But I think that the industry is moving ahead of the Nielsen numbers and ahead of the model numbers. And there's a lot of client conversations that are going on at the moment that say, you know what, there's a moment at which the number of samples of one, including you and all of your kids who you incessantly refer to in meetings and their media behavior, tells you that you have to be ahead of the curve of whatever the data's telling you. One of the challenges within that is that there's perhaps an attention premium on one side of the ledger, but in many cases there's a price penalty on the other side of the ledger. So many of the biggest advertisers and users of video who and reaching broad audiences have secured their rate bases in television and begun to normalize things like full episode player rates and so forth alongside television. So to them, in a CPM base rate point of view and protecting their long-term base rates, online video is still looking actually quite expensive to many of them. So there's a number of competing forces, and even some of those places where you kind of have a sense that it should be a slam dunk, it isn't, because there are a number of dynamics at play.
Yeah, I totally hear that point. I mean, I expect what we'll see in 2015 is a lot of emphasis from buyers, sellers, and everybody in between on trying to prove hypotheses along the lines of what you said, which is, I think intuitively a lot of folks would say, hey, people are more engaged online, they are potentially more likely to take action or to have better brand lift online, and that is what does or does not justify the price premium. But as you said, I think as an industry, we don't have the systemic data and agreement to prove that one way or another, and I expect that's going to be a huge priority for all of us as we head into the new year. Allison, you look at data all day long. You have any comments on this in terms of either what Rob and I were just talking about in terms of engagement in one place or another, or anything that you're just seeing as a particular learning or insight that you're seeing marketers pick up on in 2014?
Yeah, I think it's been a really exciting year for online video and for YouTube. We've obviously seen a huge shift to mobile. I think people, are consuming snackable content, so they want video on their mobile, whenever they want to watch. One of the interesting trends, and I wanted to actually loop back to what Josh was talking about, has to do with brands really embracing the YouTube platform and embracing the content that people want to consume on YouTube, and having a lot of amazing partnerships with YouTube creators. And so I actually, on your YouTube /advertise page, you've got two different playlists. One that's got ad content, some of the greatest ads of the year, but who didn't partner with YouTube creators. And then you've got a playlist of people that did, so people who partnered with Dude Perfect or partnered with BuzzFeed. And we actually see 2x the engagement on the content where they partnered with YouTube creators. So I think the YouTube creators have an amazing ability to engage audiences. We see someone like Bethany Moda who's got 8% engagement on her content, and it's amazing to see what happens when brands partner with those creators.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think that actually has a lot to do with Rob's hypothesis about the relatable nature of these new celebrities, whether on YouTube or anywhere else. I vividly remember in June of this year, I was sitting in a panel at VidCon where several of the top creators were talking directly to marketers about why they're so stringent about how they incorporate integration, brand integration or product integration into their content. And they were talking very significantly about how this authenticity and this relatability and the genuineness of where and how things come into their environment is such a precious thing because of, to your point, the strength and additional impact it can convey to their fan base when it's done well. But quite frankly, the risk not just to them, but really to the brand of doing it in a way that doesn't feel as genuine, because these folks feel like these guys are their best friend. I mean, they will, unlike I want to get a celebrity signing or I want to get a celebrity picture that I frankly a lot of us grew up with. I mean, these guys really feel that Bethany and Hannah and some of these other folks are like their dear friends. And the kind of contact and quality of contact that they are engaging in with these celebrities is just different than I think anything that we've seen before, and so that's presumably what's driving the impact when that's executed well. Josh, what's your feeling on this? What's your feeling on engaging with YouTube creators specifically, or again creators on other platforms that are offering online opportunities versus doing our own thing but taking advantage of the medium and the platform itself?
I was going to make some joke about how maybe you're speaking for yourself and not for me. Maybe I've just turned 26, but therefore I'm part of that.
You are clearly much younger than I am, Josh, in any event, no doubt.
Yeah. So I think I'm really struck by this year. I took a tour of a number of YouTube maker studios, actual companies who made their business on YouTube, and I think one of the things that is overlooked is just the cost of production and the change of mindset and the speed at which these young creators and new content producers are producing stuff. And it's actually a massive shift. I started out my career in the agency side, making $1 million TV spots back in, I guess, the golden oldie days when you could do that.
Watch out, you're dating yourself.
I know, it's terrible, isn't it? So I'm just the energy and the excitement, and I just encourage everyone. You've got to embrace this new world and recognize that there are new modes of production, and that actually impacts how you can then engage with a brand. And when you go speak, and when we speak and try to work with Maker Studios or Awesomeness TV, they work at a different pace, a different speed, actually a lot closer to Google world, where coding can be done very, very fast. But it sort of changes the paradigm, and you've got to be very buttoned up on what you strategically want to say, but then you sort of have to hand over the controls, because it's got to be authentic. These brands have been successful and have built that relationship, and I completely agree with Rob's point and the one you've echoed, how authenticity and being someone like me or connected to me or someone I can relate to is really, really powerful, and it's really hard for brands run by senior, aged marketers to actually get that right. And it means giving up some control and all those other cliches we've been talking about for years, but really understanding the pace of where it's all moving and that content production. And so you've got to be quicker to adapt and actually approve ideas and let stuff run, because so much of it is about the freshness and the vibrancy of the brand and the partner you're working with.
So, what's interesting to me about this conversation is that it reflects a little bit of what I still see in the landscape, which I find fascinating, right? Which is, no matter how much we hit on mobile when it relates to a specific point, the conversation still kind of drifts away when it comes to video, right? The data is saying, again, gosh, 50% of the watch time on YouTube is coming from mobile, and we're seeing a lot of similar things in many other online video players. And so you would think we would be saying like mobile, 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 mobile all the time. And a lot of folks are, but not as much about video. And I'm just curious, do you guys see that? Do you feel differently? Are people really talking about mobile video first in your organizations? Or is this something where, again, we just have to kind of turn the lens back and be like, right, wait, the mobile version? Evan, I know one of your campaigns that we're going to show shortly was heavily multi-screen. I mean, at Anheuser-Busch, do you feel like you guys really are as focused on mobile as consumers are, or not?
Yeah,
in either way, what do you think is driving that?
I would definitely say mobile is, a huge priority for us, and thinking mobile first. I don't think we would be where we are right now if we weren't already moving in that direction. I think it is this kind of dual situation. You have to play to the context. So I think what it really comes down to, and what the company is embracing, and from a strategic point of view, what we're looking at is you really have to play into the context. You have to consider, that's why doing your research before you go out and create content needs to consider, where would they consume this content? Is it on their commute to work? And what should be the content length for that? And what would they be interested in actually consuming at that time? That's very different than the content you might be creating for the Super Bowl and the context for that. So mobile first is obviously hugely important. It's only going to get more important, but not to be so one-dimensional. We need to look at it from a broad perspective, and it's really just thinking in terms of context.
So that sounds a lot to me like a planning question. Rob, when you guys think about planning and how that translates into your execution, what are you seeing from a mobile standpoint?
I'm just thinking carefully how to respond to this, because AB InBev in North America has just become a hopefully treasured client of MediaComms, which is one of our companies. And so, first of all, I'd like to say to Evan, I agree with every word you say. I admire you enormously, albeit from afar.
Great.
So good. So with that sycophancy behind us, I think that what's interesting to me in the mobile world is I think about it as much as anything else about the creation of new day parts. I think about it as much about it in the sense of different use cases and a different kind of co-viewing use case, particularly in younger audiences, sharing experiences via mobile phones. I think very, very hard about ad content that I see that's made by advertisers, because I don't get to make it. I only get to distribute it. It's a manufacturing business and a distribution business, and I'm broadly speaking in the distribution business. And I find myself very frequently counseling advertisers that there is a fantastic opportunity here in mobile, and then at the same time pulling myself back and saying, well, hang on a second, is the intimacy of that experience, is the use of bandwidth consumption, is the ad load in relation to content ratio right for you to run that film? Now, the great thing is that when you have clients like Nike and you have clients like AB, there's almost nothing that those guys make, and Dove with sketches and various other things, that doesn't make their ad to content ratio feel good, and there's almost nothing that those guys make that don't make the intimacy of the experience feel good. I think what's intriguing about it is that the ads that we've shown that have been great on YouTube are great ads. They also happen to be on YouTube, and I think there's a kind of interesting challenge. I think more generally, the more authentic the content is and looks less addy. So it's a lot of the work that's made by Maker, the work that's done by Fullscreen and people like that in the MCM world who aren't kind of in themselves music or entertainment conglomerates, is a very good guide. And of course Vice would come into that same category. So when we talk about mobile, in fact when we talk about anything in mobile, our first question is, are you mobile ready with the assets you have? Because we think with greater discretion and greater critical discretion about what we want to distribute on mobile versus what we want to distribute elsewhere.
Smart. Well, let's take a look then, since you are such an admirer of AB, as I've always known you to be. And Evan, you guys have put out a great campaign this year. You guys will probably remember the Puppy Love campaign from the Super Bowl, if nothing else. You guys remember that campaign? I'm going to take the distant screens vaguely nodding as a yes. What we're going to do is we're going to show a little bit of how that campaign evolved, particularly in a multi-screen world, because it ties very much, I think, into what both Evan and Rob were saying in terms of what it takes to take advantage of that medium. And I like the way you phrased it, right, to actually, frankly, take advantage of that day part. So, guys, let's show the Puppy Love video.
At Anheuser-Busch, we want to be the #1 company in a digital world. Consumers are evolving, behaviors are evolving, so the way we connect to them should evolve as well. So one of the key strategies that we had was we wanted to leverage the organic search for the Super Bowl spots. So we went to Brand Lab to spend 2 full days at their campus in San Francisco to learn about consumer behavior, trends, benchmarks. So 6 days before Super Bowl, we released the spot and created a lot of buzz. And for me, that was one of the best things that happened in this campaign.
Makes me smile every time. So Evan, what do you think made this campaign so successful? What are some of the things we can learn from it?
I mean, I think there's a lot to analyze there, and I think it goes back to my first comment, content being crucial. You know, without good content, regardless of the plan, and it's not going to get that amount of earned engagement as you saw for Puppy Love. But I think it goes also to what Harry's talking about, and it's just the right planning. In this case, it was planning ahead, releasing ahead based off the insight that the people would be anticipating and searching for the ads before they were released. And in that particular year, the insight was if you release ahead of time, you're actually going to maximize the amount of earned viewership that you could have. So I think that was, a fantastic insight that was really based off the fact of the planning process that they went through. And then, again, the success metrics that they put in place, planning ahead for success and what those metrics would look like, really allowed them to lean in on something that they could tell was going well because they were prepared to understand what success looked like. And that really is what elevated that from being something that was, released ahead of time, got engagement, to something that became really culturally shared around.
That makes sense, and it's pretty consistent, I think, with what Rob was saying about authenticity and ads that are just great stories and don't necessarily feel like they're pushing anything. And it's interesting because some of the research that's published in the report, along with the IPG Media Lab, shows that consumers are getting increasingly proactive in demanding and looking for this kind of content. So the question I have for the group then is, all right, Evan said, it all started with a great insight, and Rob said, I mean, the ads were on YouTube, but they were just great ads. So that all sounds like things we've known and done before. And yet it seems when you talk to marketers or frankly to many agencies, a lot of what you keep hearing is we have to make this simpler, we have to make it easier, we have to make it more possible for folks to be creating more of this content in ways like the way Josh was describing many of the content creators are doing it. So I guess my question to you guys is, what makes it so challenging? What makes it so different? And what advice do you have for our audience in terms of how they can take advantage of these platforms in ways that are easier or simpler for them as they think about their plans for the new year? And Josh, maybe we start with you because it builds off the ideas. I think some of the ideas you're saying about how the content creators are doing this themselves.
So this has been a real struggle and a real challenge. We want everyone to be mobile first. And often when you say everyone do this, no one then does it because it falls through the crack and no one's quite sure what to do. So I think we've adopted effectively a two-pronged strategy. We expect everyone to demand mobile first, but because this is a nascent space, because this is a confusing and challenging and new space, we actually have asked our agencies and asked our internal teams to have dedicated resources to make people who are mobile champions and evangelists, but more than just, hey, mobile's great, we should do stuff, actually empower them to create stuff. Create mobile-only briefs, refuse to see work which isn't led by the mobile idea first, and actually force the system in the short term. And I'm not sure how long this will go on, but it reminds me of when digital first started taking off and everyone said, we want digital ideas, we want digital. And it took several years before the industry really caught up and digital started becoming a standard part of the creative playbook. We've forced teams to actually say, you are dedicated to mobile, and we're trying to do it sort of widthways by asking everyone to be mobile first, but also vertically by creating vertical mobile experts who then force and lead on projects.
Cool. So dedicated evangelists, very clear crystal standards, and then refusing to see work that doesn't adhere to them. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm not quite drinking that particular bit of Kool-Aid. I loved what Evan said about looking at the pre-release strategy for Puppy Love. Evan, you'll be delighted to know that Mediacom had the identical experience with the Darth Vader VW ad with YouTube a couple of years ago, which had that same kind of arc built around pre-release and so forth. The other thing that I'm kind of interested, I wanted to say, so I think there's a distribution angle to this, which is as well as the creative angle, which is super important. The other thing is that I'm fond of a remark made by, there's a guy called Mark Zuckerberg who runs a small company called Facebook nearby Google, and Mark used the expression social by design. And I'm really interested in creativity that's social by design. And one of our other clients, Nestle in India, did a really interesting corporate campaign in which they touched on some really kind of key social issues of adoption and the sharing of food and the changing nature of families in India, and built the components of this quite long piece of communication, which ran on mobile and in other environments as well, but was built for online. And they did that because they knew there were interlocking story triggers. And that was like a very serious interpretation of the same thing that made Gangnam Style do what Gangnam Style did, which conjoined a whole bunch of different almost celebrity and social cohorts and allowed those to interweave together to build their reach. So I guess that my concern principally with and I think all of those characteristics, the same characteristics that make things social and make things collectively engaging and things that people love to share, are also the things that are going to work really well on mobile. But that's a slightly different kind of nuance to saying, I need to think about this mobile first.
So your articulation is, if we are thinking about the interactive and context-driven nature of what we're doing, it should be able to express itself everywhere and be able to engage people in more compelling ways, irrespective of which particular format it's taking that day.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I think the bar is higher for what you choose to put in front of people in a mobile environment, or it should be higher, and therefore the characteristics that I've described become more important. So maybe there is a mechanism for thinking about it mobile first, but it's not a kind of literal mechanism for thinking about it mobile first.
That makes sense. Well, frankly, that makes it easier. Evan, any advice for the audience on how they can engage more deeply?
Yeah, I think something that we're going to be zeroing in on in the next year. We've been talking around the idea of authenticity, but in and of itself, authenticity isn't going to unlock, I think, everything you're looking for in YouTube and ultimately driving the brand health goals that you have. It's really about that consistency long term. And really standing for something and defining the role that YouTube is going to play in that digital ecosystem that you have for communication for your brand. And I think once you define that and being able to consistently deliver on that is when you're actually going to see not only better return on your investment, but also audience growth, and I think even more of a fanship versus just pushing out content. There's more of a pull factor to it. So I think that's really a big challenge I see for the company, but in general for brands is having that consistency. And you look at examples like epic rap battles of history, you go to their channel and every thumbnail, it looks like the exact same thing, but that's actually a good thing, and people know what they're clicking on, and they know that the entertainment value and the content quality is going to be very high. So I think that's what we need to aspire to do, is have that type of consistency, and I think that's where you'll see us heading in the next year.
I think that's a great point. A couple of years ago, that became one of the key messages to creators because we were seeing exactly what you were saying, which is the results went through the roof once creators started to have more consistency, more thematic, we know when to show up, we know when your stuff's going to go live, it looks the same, we know what to expect. And I think brands taking advantage of that in the same way is a really great point. Allison, you look across advertisers and agencies all the time. Anything you'd add to this in terms of advice for what can make it simpler or easier to get started?
Yeah, so I think YouTube has a great framework, Hero, Hub, Hygiene. Hopefully if you all are on the YouTube Insights Hangout, you've heard of that framework as well. And I think that, Puppy Love was an amazing example of hero content. It was heroic in every sense. It was amazing content. It got an amazing response. And I don't think you can publish something like that every day. And so what I see is data can really help inform your hub and hygiene content. So how can you use data about your audience and about the content that works in online video to create content? And so, for example, we see people using tubular data to understand what time of day their audience is engaged, what videos they're most engaged with, what's, for example, in the cosmetics vertical, what's trending in beauty videos right now, and how can you jump on that trend to create content that's in line with what we're seeing. For example, wake up with me videos or getting unready videos where people take off their makeup at the end of the day. If you can be a part of that conversation, we've seen a lot of brands be really successful with that. And in addition, oftentimes people's fans are their biggest advocates, and we see actually a lot of brands, 80% of their content comes from fan videos, whether it's various things related to their product. And so if you can playlist that content or engage with that content, it's really an amazing way for brands to get involved on the platform.
So you said something interesting, I think, in addition to sort of thinking about the arcs of consumer behavior that you can anticipate and how that ties with your product launch and how you might sort of build around that. You talked a little bit about staying on top of hot trends that are happening right now on YouTube and how you can play into those. I am mirroring one of those right now. You guys know what I'm doing? Anybody?
Looks like an unboxing.
We're unboxing one of the hot trends of the retail period. I'm impressed. And it's been fascinating to me. I'm not going to lie. When someone first said that to me, I was like, what? They're doing what? And what we saw was just an explosion of videos of people unboxing products and sharing and showing and conveying what they're all about all around the holiday shopping period, which made them their own relatable celebrities. And you saw folks like Sony and IKEA and others sort of jump in on that trend. And it is one of the things that has also just vastly accelerated results around some of those campaigns if you're able to be in the flow in that way. Just curious, again, from any of you guys, Rob, Evan, Josh, how active are you, or how active do you encourage marketers to be in terms of being involved personally in any of these platforms, whether it be YouTube or Facebook or Pinterest or whatever, to experience what the consumers themselves are experiencing, not just so they understand the platform, but so that they're actually on the alert for some of these trends?
Well, I mean, for me, I think that goes back again to context and really audience insight. And that's why what you create for YouTube should be different than other platforms. I don't necessarily believe anyone's going to, one of these other platforms to actually consume or create that type of content necessarily. They're going to YouTube. So, the content we create, and Allison, to your point, for more of the hub and the hygiene, needs to really take into account even more than the hero content. What are these platform nuances, behaviors that are so authentic? If we want to be authentic, we have to understand these details and share them in our company. And that's part of the role that I have in the company, is to share these insights, these best practices, so that in the markets, not even just the U.S., all the markets can start to capitalize on that when we start to build out this portfolio of content that we put on YouTube.
Cool. Allison, I know you had something special that you were going to unbox for us for this year-end edition. What are you going to share with us today?
Well, I don't have any props, sadly. Next time I'll have to have a whiteboard behind me, and I can be like the weatherman segment with some sort of interactive data. But what I did do was pull data about holiday trends last year versus this year, and it's really amazing. We're seeing 2x the views. So in 2013, there was about 500 million views on holiday-related content. In 2014, we're seeing 1 billion views. And so there's 2x the views, 2x the engagement, and 25% more uploads, which is amazing. And so we started to dig into those trends and see what was driving it. And one interesting driver is we're seeing 42% more uploads of All I Want for Christmas cover songs. So a lot of people uploading cover songs and watching sort of holiday cover songs.
Is that you, Rob?
Do you know something? I'm much older than anyone else on this call, and actually maybe even there could be a couple in which I can beat you combined. And I'm actually, my plea is for an additional amendment to the Constitution, and that is that it should be an inalienable right to be mystified by some things and not have to explain yourself, and this is one of them.
I get that. All right, but Allison, keep telling us what the youth are doing.
The data is the data. I'm sorry, it's what's real. We're seeing.
I didn't say I was right.
We're seeing 100% more views on gaming content, and we've seen a 50% increase in uploads on people and vlog content. So in the last 30 days alone, there's been 12 million views on gift guide content. So a lot of people creating gift guides, gift guide for her, gift guide for him, and these are all YouTube vloggers, people in their bedrooms who are giving their advice about gifts. Another cool trend has been DIY gifts. So how can you make your own gifts to give to people? And that really plays into the authenticity trends that we were discussing earlier. So yeah, my weatherman outlook is strong for the holiday season in terms of views on the YouTube platform.
That's good, and frankly, I am way behind on my gift giving and gift planning and trying to encourage my children to be about DIY gifts, so now I've got a lot more resource available, so I appreciate that. All right, guys, this has been awesome. What I'd love to do is, as we close out, let's go around, and I'd love to hear from each of you. What is your New Year's resolution as it relates to video? And maybe, Josh, we'll start with you.
We are going to uncover, or are uncovering, a bunch of different signals beyond viewability that impact conversion, attribution, and effectiveness.
Cool. I'm excited about that. Evan?
Pretty related. I think that taking the smarter metrics that we now have and really understanding how they link back to the drivers of the business, so that we really can start to understand return on investment in video. I mean, video is great. We know that from consumer response and engagement. So really actually getting closer to lower funnel and understanding that impact.
Terrific. Allison?
So I mentioned we're an intelligence company, so one of our goals for the year is to not just provide data and insights, but recommendations around what to do with it. So So, knowing that DIY gift guides is trending, and so this is the content you should create, and this is how you should promote it, and this is how you can track and optimize. And we're just excited to, be a part of this online video revolution and help people make sense of all the data and do something with it.
Great. And Rob?
I'd like to be part of the vanguard that persuades brands that their tolerance for content association should be dictated by the consumer, not by necessarily the people that run the company, and for them to look for relatable data that tells them how far ahead of the traditional tracking measures they should be in their investment cycle.
I would love to be part of that vanguard too. Well, it sounds like this merry band could come together. Rob can convince them. The data will prove it out to Josh and Evan, and Allison will help us iterate and build upon the opportunities available. I will say my personal resolution is to make this program one of the top videos for brand advertisers and agencies who are trying to figure out what to do in online video, and I hope that you guys will continue to help me with tips and tricks for that audience as we move into the new year. Thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Audience, appreciate you being attentive as well. Please be on the lookout for the next YouTube Insights report, which is coming out in January. And you can always check out the full collection at thinkwithgoogle.com/YouTube-insights. Very happy holidays to all of you, and look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks so much.